Hello, hello. Welcome back, everyone. So I'm sure we're going to have some regulars coming through, but for those of you who are new, this is a free and open meditation class. This is made possible by the generous donors and contributors who allow me to do this full time. So at the moment, I'm teaching meditation, making content, and doing interviews on the new podcast, all for free and without any ads. So if you stumble upon this later and you'd like to continue making this possible, if you're getting some value out of it, consider becoming a member on YouTube or making a donation to one of the links down below. You can also send through super thanks, super chats, all of the cool things that YouTube allows you to do, whatever's convenient. If you'd like the majority of the donation you make to go to me, then try to use Venmo down below, or you can use GoFundMe and slide the slider down to 0 for the GoFundMe folks, or down to a reasonable amount, and then most of the money will go towards supporting this effort that some people are finding some value in. So, my friends, welcome, welcome, happy Saturday. I was hoping and intending to have the first. Hey, good to see you. I was hoping and intending to have the first episode of the podcast edited and back up, but I've been actually working the last 4 days super hardcore with Neil Ripsky getting a new website up for his Lohan training, and he's been working super hardcore designing the curriculum to take someone who's a rote beginner in everything to do with physical training for meditation and the martial arts and anything like Shaolin systems. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. And he's designing a bottom-up, total beginner to total expert curriculum for the new course, and should have the first 7 weeks worth of videos ready to go, I would say, within the next week. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to relaunch that first episode of the podcast with all of my edits and overlays, along with the website and course that he's offering in Lohan in the links below that podcast. So as soon as you see that podcast go live, the course, if you're interested, for training in Lohan, wherever you happen to be in the world, will also be going live at the same time. So that's very exciting. I thought it would take much longer than this, but since I don't teach the energetic aspects or the physical body aspects of training and meditation, and Neil does, it seemed like a match made in heaven. And we're already talking about he and I potentially doing in-person events where I teach the meditation portion of the event and he teaches the physical and energetic portion of the event. How cool would that be? Right. Okay. Mr. Parker's video. Oh, yes, yes. So I'm starting to make the rounds, doing a number of podcast interviews, and wherever I find humans, as long as they're not worshiping Satan or whatever, I'm going to turn up and talk to people, because I'd like lay people living in the real world to get excited about training and meditation. It is something we can do. Going all the way back to the time of the Buddha, there are wonderful examples of lay people who became highly accomplished meditators. So all throughout the canon, in every country where Buddhism has touched down, we find great meditators. And it's my opinion, after studying a huge amount of different religions as an academic and training in Buddhism and Taoism for 20 years, that anybody who trains in concentration practices, meditation practices where you build a highly concentrated mind, will benefit from those practices. And this goes for if you're Advaita Vedanta, if you're Eastern Orthodox, if you're a Theravada practitioner, if you're a Mahayana practitioner, if you're doing sutra practice in the Mahayana or tantric practice in the Mahayana, if you're training in internal martial arts and want to deepen your ability to do those arts because you have more awareness and concentration. I mean, even down to, some of the sort of, let's say, slightly more fringe types of things that you might want to do that are in the spiritual realm or religious realm. I think a huge number of these things rely upon your ability to engage in single-pointed concentration. And so whatever it is you'd like to do, I think even being successful in the ordinary world in an ordinary sense, training and concentration is going to benefit you. So that's why I'm on a bit of a mission, and that's why I teach the techniques that I do, foundations 1 through 5, as I call them, in a sort of secular, non-sectarian way, because these are human skills. And these human skills lead to religious experience, but it's because of causal processes that it leads to different things that you'll want to write poetry about, right? Concentration training leads to things that you start to have to talk about as if they are religion, and it leads to things you want to write poems about because the world is and your mind are so different than you thought. And you can see that by training in concentration. And I have students from a number of different backgrounds, from Jewish to pretty skeptical, secular, to mostly having been involved with Hindu practices in the past, to Eastern Orthodox. And they all benefit from these practices. Theravada, Mahayana, Zen, Pure Land. Really, these techniques will work for just about any practice you want to do, and the ones that I don't teach, it enhances. So by the way, those of you who are new, I'm just sort of rambling on, because in this class for the first 20 minutes or so, I take questions, but if nobody asks any questions about their practice, then I just ramble on until it's time to do our group session together. So if you do have questions about your practice, just pop them into the chat, which I can see right here in front of me, and I will be happy to answer your questions about meditation. Do, if you can, try to keep it related to your personal practices, not theoretical questions, but stuff you're actually working on. Earth Wombat asks, when opening the sense gates, the head and face muscles aren't supposed to contract or tighten. You might find, in general, when you're working on training and concentration for a long time, and I've even seen some documentaries where pretty advanced practitioners who are spending a lot of time in retreat, still you'll see sometimes they're sitting there and watch my lips a little bit. You'll see them and everything else will be still, but they'll go, you know, that thing you do when you're really trying to focus on a detail and you kind of purse your lips a little bit. So, you know, I think disconnecting that part of your mind that tends to contract your face muscles and so forth a little bit when you're trying to do some concentrated activity, I think that's a fair ways down the road in terms of training. So if you find that you're doing a little bit of those sort of concentration phases, don't worry about it too much. It'll stop happening eventually. And if it's happening, it's not so important. The main thing is that you try to bring as much of your attention to the visual field, for example, as you can, and you'll find that probably over time your need or desire to make faces to do that becomes less. Oat Social Media asks, when I visualize something, I seem to have two different ways of visualizing something. The first appears in the blackness of the visual field. The second appears more in the mind's eye. Which of these should I try to focus on when visualizing? So this is an interesting whole area of discussion, because you're quite right in saying there are a couple different ways you can visualize something. One is to visualize it as if it's basically in the room with you, and the other is to visualize it in a mental space, even though in reality both of them are in a mental space, right? But your mind is capable of sort of blending the visualized thing with what seems to appear visually, and it's capable of visualizing it in a, let's say, a more abstract sort of, in philosophy, what they would call a Menongian space, in a space that isn't ordinary space. I think it depends on what kind of practice you're doing. There are some practices in the Tibetan corpus, for example, where it behooves you, if you can, to try to visualize things as if they're actually there in front of you or around you, as the case may be. In the case of the technique that I'm teaching for the Five Foundations course, just as a matter of practicality, as best you can, you're visualizing the numbers with your eyes closed, is the way that I recommend it, so that more of your bandwidth is turned inwards. Since you're visualizing with the eyes closed, still it's as if it's here in front of you, right? In physical space, not in Menongian space, not in abstract space, but as if the number is here in front of you in actual space, even though your eyes are closed, right? So in a sense, it's on the back of your eyelids, the image, because you're seeing it amongst the blackness of the visual image, if that makes sense. So that's the way I would recommend, because I think that's a better preparation for various types of practices that come much, much, much later, in which you're visualizing things as if they're in the actual visual field instead of in an abstract space in your head. So getting a little bit of practice at that is and can be quite helpful. That's a really, really good question. See, I love questions like this because what it tells me is that people are doing their practice and real stuff is coming up. And just so you guys know, this is the function of the community, because by a show of hands in the chat, how many of you had that question? I would say probably not very many of you had that question. I'd be surprised if one or two others had that question, because it's sort of an odd question, right? But if we went through every person in the comments in the chat right now, and you asked one question about the practices we're actually doing, probably each one of you would learn 5 or 6 new things you hadn't even thought to ask, because other people come at the issue from a slightly different angle, or they're how to say, or mm, they're struggling with something different in the practice than you are, and hearing the community ask that question locks it in your brain, locks it in your mind. So this is why the community is so important. It's like the example of putting all the potatoes in the bucket, right? If you wash one potato at a time, you have to scrub all the dirt off of each potato one by one, and it's really hard to do. But if you put them all in a bucket and then you stir it or you shake it, then the potatoes bump into each other and they wash each other off. And that's the community. You learn from each other's mistakes and each other's successes and each other's curiosity and questions. And things go 10 times faster than if you were just trying to do it alone. Okay. Felt like you're getting seasick opening all the sense gates while walking. So one of the disorienting things about opening the sense gates is that normally there's a you in the middle, somewhere between the sensory perception and the thing that's being perceived. So it seems like you are seeing, you is my head, let's say. So it feels like you are seeing, right? I'm the one who gets to do the seeing, and there's stuff being seen. So there are 3 components, right? But when you train in concentration, it goes like this, and the middle piece goes away, and you see that actually there's just the seeing aspect and the seen aspect, and there's the you that you thought was in the middle isn't there. So that can be really disorienting if you're getting decent concentration. The other aspect is that if you're trying to open all the sense gates, you may not be putting enough awareness in the body, And if your bandwidth is pulling up and out of the body and into the other senses, one of the things your body does is it tells you where you are in space. So you have I think it's, oops, sorry, it's through your fascia, I think. Your fascia network has these nerve endings that tell you where your body is in space and what your body is doing. And if you pull the bandwidth up out of the body and into the other senses, then you can lose sense of where you are in space and what you're doing. So that may be one aspect. The other aspect is that if you're training a lot in concentration, you haven't done it before, it can make you feel nauseous if you do too much of it. So it's hard to say without talking to you a lot more about the various things that could be going on, but those are some reasons that may be happening if you're feeling a little nauseous and sort of disoriented in space. So yeah, in that case, think about it like a volume knob, right? Instead of turning the volume up to 90 or 100, turn it up to like 60 or 70. And then as your concentration improves and you get the right blend of elements, then turn the volume up a little more. And if you need to take a break, take a break. As a matter of fact, in the Lamrim Chenmo and in the Shantideva's Guide to a Bodhisattva Way of Life, when they talk about effort, training in effort, they actually talk about one of the major aspects of training in effort is learning how to take a rest, because it's through rest that you're able to exert full effort next time. Okay. Uh, a little more light. Okay, let's see. How does one determine if experience and meditation are based in reality versus imagination and fabrication? I have seen lamas be brought in that had some clairvoyant abilities, and he too was wrong in his meditative analysis. Yeah, that's those two questions are quite interesting and complicated. But in brief, the better you get at concentration, the better you'll be able to see whether or not what you're doing with your imagination is something, or whether or not what you're doing is something you're making up with your imagination or something that you're really experiencing. I mean, this is one of the fundamental capabilities of training in concentration, is being able to determine what types of cognitive events are occurring. And then also, in terms of a Buddhist standpoint on telling things about future events, for example, future events haven't happened yet, but from a Buddhist point of view, they're based upon karma. And karma doesn't determine in the future exactly what will happen, it just limits the possibilities about what can happen. So a person who can see the karmic possibilities can say, you know what, we're converging on this possibility, but they can't actually, I mean, if they could see all the possibilities, maybe they can get they can be very accurate. But at least in my understanding of how it works, they can see sort of the better the clairvoyance gets, you can see the range of things that could happen. So, for example, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, on one occasion for one of my teachers, his father was passing away, and looked at the whole situation and said, there's no prayers or anything we can do to affect the situation. He's going to pass away right now. But then on another occasion, for a different student, said, the doctors had said, I can't remember what, like he has 2 weeks or a month or something to live. And they went to Lama Zopa Rinpoche and said, are there any prayers or pujas or things we can do? And they said, yes, actually, based on the situation, we can do these things, and he'll probably get a couple more years. And then this guy ended up living for 2 or 3 more years. So, you know, karma is sort of like causes headed in a certain direction, and they determine the range of things that can happen in the future, but not necessarily exactly what does happen in the future, because a lot of different events could unfold, which is actually how, things like puja and prayer and so forth work. So what do I mean by rest? I mean, just take a rest. Don't do anything deliberate. Just chill out. Like, you know, have a sandwich. Thank you, Oates. Yes, it does help other people find the stream if you interact with the stream, if you hit like, if you leave comments on the video after it's done, that sort of thing, that will help other people find it. That can be helpful. Okay. All right, friends. Shall we do some practice? We're at about 20 minutes in. As you know, since we're facing this direction instead of this direction, we're doing standing and walking practice today. Uh, so Sasa asks, before we move on, can excessive debate or intellectual discussion become an obstacle to practice? Yeah, it can. Although I mean, I'm a little bit biased perhaps in saying that I think more people need more of that, actually. And not debate and discussion on the internet with people that don't know anything, but debate and discussion with practitioners who have been on the path a long time who actually know stuff. Because what happens when you debate and discuss with practitioners who have been around a while and have seen things, experienced things, done things, studied things at great depth, is that you end up learning a lot more than if you were just sort of reading a book, for example, or watching a video. I haven't used this example in a long time, but when my teacher and I were studying a book, very often, actually not very often, just in general, our practice was that we would go through the book line by line, paragraph by paragraph, and we would stop after, sometimes after reading every line, or sometimes after reading every paragraph in the text, and we would talk about it, or ask questions about it, or he would comment on it. So the wisdom of the text, and what was really shocking was that a huge number of times, I mean almost every time, I thought I understood what the text meant, and then he would explain the text to me and it was totally different than what I thought, like not even close. So the information in the text, the semantic value, right, the semiotics, the actual meaning of the thing isn't in the book. It's in the minds of other practitioners who are in that lineage and have trained in that information and have studied with practitioners who know that information also through a combination of study and practice. And so when people ask me, can you give me a good book on Buddhism? Usually I say, I used to have all sorts of recommendations and now I just say no. No, I can't give you a good book on this. A great book on Buddhism is any book you're studying in a lineage with people who actually know what the book means. That's a good book on Buddhism. Every other book on Buddhism sucks. I'm being a little bit hyperbolic. There are some decent books you could read about Buddhism, obviously, that would leave you in a better position than you're in now, probably. But if you really, really, really want to understand what these texts mean, you have to study them in a lineage. There's no other way than this. And so, likewise, if you want to debate and discuss these things, find people that have spent a significant amount of time in a lineage and debate and discuss it with those people who have a combination of study and practice of a particular subject and text in that lineage. Otherwise, you'll spend years with the wrong idea about stuff. Yeah, Ashley, it's a great example. Great example. Yeah, illuminating the intent is one of the greats. It's one of the greats. And Prasangika, that was the main topic of my PhD. Um, I had a long conversation with, well, not a long conversation, but a short conversation with Thupten Jinpa, who you'll know, former translator for the Dalai Lama, who's also, for those who don't know, is a Geshe Larampa, which means that he trained in, he got the sort of highest credential you can studying in his tradition as a Gelug practitioner. And then, in addition to sort of, how to say, having to pass your final exams amongst your seniors who are extraordinary practitioners and scholars of the tradition, you then have to go to all of the major Tibetan colleges and pass in front of all of the major scholars of every major college. And then I think you have to do detailed study in a specialty area in the system. So getting a Larampa distinction is really, really difficult and rare. So he's a Geshe Rampa that speaks English and has a PhD from a Western university. So I asked him, how do we fix pramana with the Prasangika view? How do you understand when you look at an object, if this object has no specific identity and no specific characteristics coming from its own side, how do you know what it is? How do you know what this thing is if there's nothing specific coming from the object that tells you what it is? Because that's how most epistemology works. Most epistemological systems say there's some information that comes from the object, and you use that information to figure out what the object is and know what it is. Or that the object itself is a particular thing, and its characteristics sort of help you get at whatever that specific identity is. And Prasangika says none of that is there. And until I think 1980, no scholar, even in the Gelug tradition, had maybe even until 1993, maybe it was, no Gelug scholar had published an actual text fixing this issue. Because it's just sort of a thing you don't do. You don't add to the canon in that way. And then someone did. And I didn't know the book existed, and neither did Thupten Jinpa. And so I had to sort of figure it out on my own. I had to propose my own solution, go through a long, years-long process of trying to solve it. And then I found this book, and in the book it was almost exactly the same to the solution that I came up with, which was kind of cool. Okay. Unfortunately, that book's also not available in English, so I had to learn enough Tibetan to be able to translate it with the help of an expert translator. So yeah, for those who are interested, middle way consequentialist philosophy is considered by my school to be the most subtle position on selflessness, emptiness. But the resources for studying it are not in one place. They're spread out all over the place. So really getting clear on exactly what the position is and how it works takes years of work of collecting resources from all over the place. So that was a big chunk of my PhD, was just putting all those resources in one place and then answering questions in Pramana for, you'll be aware of those issues, Ashley, maybe. And then having done those two projects of describing the view and how it is we know what things are, I then applied it to the philosophy of science in the Western canon and compared it against two philosophers in the Western canon who some people in the academy say have a very similar view to Buddhism. And I said, no, they don't. It's not even close. They're essentialists. They're rejecting a whole bunch of stuff, but that's not what we're doing. We're not rejecting anything. We're arguing that things exist. So philosophers that are arguing that a whole classes of things that do actually exist don't exist, we can't agree with those people. Even though we share similar arguments, we come to different conclusions. Yeah, Geshe Sopa's commentary on the Chenmo is really good. If you go to the back of the wisdom chapter, I believe it is, and look at the glossary, there's a term that totally exploded my understanding of emptiness from a Pasangika position. And this term is mutually existent. This term, in my opinion, is so much better than any of the other terms that are on offer for understanding how it is things exist from a Prasangika perspective. There's no comparison. Because what gets lost in a lot of Prasangika discussions is you say it's only imputation, mere imputation. It's designatedly knowable. It exists because of designation. But what this misses is that what it's imputed upon has to be a valid basis. And then the question becomes, from a pramana perspective, what do you mean that the basis is valid if the basis doesn't have, we're not autonomists. We're not autonomous. So we're not saying the autonomous, just for those who are following along, the autonomy school of the middle way says that when you look at this cup, your eyeballs see colors and shapes. And these specific characteristics are the specific characteristics that are known by a valid cognitive process, and those are real things that exist out here in the world. However, the cup is not like that. When you look, all you see is the colors and shapes. You don't see a cup. So to get the cup, you have to have, to make it simple, it's more complicated than this, but to make it simple, you have to have a concept of a cup, which includes a term, a sound, a meaning attached to the term and the sound that you mix with the sensory data. And then your mind presents you with this and says cup. And it looks like a cup out here in the world, even though to actually be a cup, you need a relationship between the specific characteristics that exist in the world and your concept of a cup being validly applied to those specific characteristics. So this is the middle way school. These are the autonomists, the Svatantrikas. The Prasangikas say, show me a color. Yeah. Show me where the color is. Show me where the shape is. What shape is this? You see the ridges here? It's not even, in a simple way, it's not even a simple bulbous kind of object because it has waves in it. So you can't just say, well, it's a cylinder. If you look closely, it's not a cylinder because it has waves. Huh. And then if you look closely at the rim, it's not like the rim is just one sort of shape. There's little bubbles and imperfections and so forth. So it's not round. Where is the roundness? If there was roundness there, there should be something that is the roundness. And so you look for the roundness, you look for the orange, you look for the black, you look for the colors. Sorry. And those aren't any more findable than the cup. So the specific characteristics that the autonomists say are there, that we impute our concept on, you can't find those any more than you can find the cup. This is what the Prasangika or the consequentialists say. So, since you can't find the specific characteristics or the identity, the thing making it what it is, you certainly can't find parts and whole. You certainly can't find the cause and effect existing in and of itself. Because if this isn't a specific object with specific characteristics, you can't say that some other set of specific causes and conditions and parts brought it into being. What did they bring into being exactly if this isn't an entity that has an identity and specific characteristics? They brought something into being that doesn't have specific characteristics and doesn't have an identity? What is that? So, mutually existent is one of the key terms. That the imputation has to go on a valid basis. How do you know the basis was valid? Not because it has specific characteristics, but because when you applied the term to whatever it was that appeared, could actually function according to the meaning of the term. In other words, you have a certain expectation for what a coffee cup should do. You apply the term to this set of, well, you also apply maybe round, cylindrical, whatever, to the object. And since you've applied these things to the object, and since those function according to the expectations of the concept, and since this object can indeed hold your coffee and you can drink out of it, and very few people will contradict you in saying it's a coffee cup, and a number of other sort of criteria that you need to apply. This is relationally or dependently a coffee cup. It's a dependent arising. Dependent arising means that it, being a coffee cup exists as a relationship. So we're arguing that coffee cups exist, and orange exists, and round and cylindrical things exist. But we're saying that all of those qualities are relationships between a valid basis and whatever's being imputed from the side of the subject. So why do we have a valid knower? It's even more difficult. I can't answer that in such a short time, but to do my very best, after you've applied the term and you go to assess whether or not it was a valid, the knower was valid, you find out that it was valid because the term functioned. Uh, if you're interested, Ashley, I can send you my whole thesis. And same thing, Oates, if you want to read the whole thesis, you can. The arguments are very detailed. It's, 4 years of work to try to solve this issue. And it does work. And you can defend it and you can apply it to other things in modern philosophy, and it works well. And, even Jay Garfield read it and said that, I don't know if he entirely agrees with me, but it works. Okay. Send me a message on Discord or Facebook and I'll send you a link. Oh yeah, I forgot. I thought that was you, Dave. Sometimes I forget whose names match to the real names of people. Um, Yashwant. Yashwant, if you go to my meditation and mindfulness course on YouTube, I have everything available for free. And that's the same resources that I provide to people who are in the course, who are donating basically to be in the course. If you would like to train a bit more hardcore for a while, I have a whole community I'm putting together of meditators to support each other in their practice. And the way that I envision this working is that as a community, through the links that are below the video, I have a school course. And the members of that community will eventually, once we get to 100 or 200 people, will begin supporting each other doing longer term retreat. How does that work? Well, I would need to assess where you need to spend enough time in the community that you're not just jumping in and having everyone pay for something and leave, obviously. So you need to be in for a couple of years. You need to be competent in the stuff that I'm teaching. You need to have completed at least one 5-day retreat in my system so that you know what you're doing. And then I would need to see. I mean, basically, I would collect the money on your behalf, and I would the members of the community would help you pay for the retreat you were going to attend, and I would be turning over the money directly to whatever the organization was that you were doing the retreat with. So, in brief, that's how it would work. But if the whole cost of the retreat, including all of your bills and so forth, that you weren't going to be able to pay for 2 weeks or a month or whatever doing long-term retreat, let's say that it was $500 or $1,000 US. If there's 100 of us, we can put you in retreat for a month for $10 each. So all of a sudden, we can help the members of the community because we're spreading out the cost between all of us. We can help members of the community go into long-term retreat, right? So this is what I'm trying to build with the school course that's linked down below. Is a community of hardcore practitioners who want to help each other do long-term retreat and more serious study. And then obviously, people who are donating by being members of that community are helping me teach everyone else for free. So there's sort of a charity aspect and a community building aspect. So you can go to the same information for free on YouTube right now by going to the meditation and mindfulness course playlist that I have on my channel, or you can join the school course and follow it through there, and either one. Either one. I also teach them here pretty regularly on YouTube. Okay, my friends, let's go ahead and get into some practice since the talking went on a little longer than normal. Right. Let's come straight to a standing position. Okay, so those of you who have trained in standing meditation with me before, you know what to do. For those, so if you've trained with me in this before, just go ahead and begin. If you haven't trained with me before, I'm going to give you the 30-second crash course. 30-second crash course, put your feet parallel like this, right? And then you're going to take your feet and put them either hip distance, which is your hips here, or shoulder distance, which is your shoulders here, not like this, right? Or shoulder distance apart, somewhere in there. Bend your knees until your weight is, let's say, 60 or 70% on the just behind the ball of the foot. And that will stretch the bottom of the feet. It will stretch the back of the calves. And if you sink your weight as if there's a heavy weight attached to your perineum, it'll stretch the front of the thighs. And then imagine that someone's grabbed the back of your head, not the back of your head, but the back third of your head, and is taking your hair and pulling it upwards. And let your spine fall down from that point towards the perineum. Okay? And that will stretch the spine slightly. And then take your arms, and instead of having limp noodle hands, put a little bit of life into the hands so that when they hang down, you stretch the arms just slightly. You're not aggressively stretching the arms out or something. They just hang and stretch, and you open the fingers so that they stretch slightly. And now, because you have slightly stretched the feet, the calves, the thighs, the spine, the arms, and the neck, you've created a bouncy, stretchy set of tissue that can hold the body up much easier than if you were just trying to hold it up with muscles. So this has all sorts of health benefits according to traditional Chinese medicine, Chinese internal martial arts, Qigong, Neigong, etc., etc. You can find practices like these in the Shaolin temple tradition. And just in general, this will make the body stronger and healthier without having to do high intensity exercise. To put it in perspective, before I started doing these exercises 5 years ago, just standing practice, I was not in good shape because I had problems from COVID and what have you. And my feet were in bad shape. I was not in good shape because I was doing academic stuff and blah, blah, blah. And after about a year of doing mostly standing practice, I could literally run up the side of a mountain, having done no running, having done no other training. So these, just standing properly, has a huge effect on your cardiovascular health, your muscular health, strength, etc. Okay, so now, next, now that the body is in a good position, just take your middle finger and touch it to your thigh so that your hands stay relatively in the same position and don't move around, because your body will try to move around on you. Now in this position, we're just going to go straight into Foundation 1, which is the first technique I teach. It is a high intensity breath practice in which you're trying to draw the entire bandwidth of your attention into a very small space, a very small patch of skin. So just breathe in naturally through the nose and find a patch of skin where you feel a lot of sensation. And when I say begin, place all of your attention on that patch of skin, literally as if your life depends upon it. Grab every bit of bandwidth of tension that you can and place it on that patch of skin. When you get to the end of every out breath, you count numbers loudly and forcefully in your mind. And if you're able, you can also visualize the numbers 1, 2, 3, and so on. And you count from 1 to 7, 7 to 0. At 0, you can move around a little bit if you need. Other than that, stay completely still. Okay? So breathe in and find that patch of skin. 3, 2, 1, begin. here. We're going to go straight into rapid body scan and then into 5 points. So bring the attention to the left foot, left ankle, left calf, knee, lower thigh, upper thigh, hip joint, right foot, right ankle, right calf, right knee, right lower thigh, right upper thigh, into the hip joint, front of the pelvis, back of the pelvis, tailbone, anus, perineum, sexual organ, the back of your waist, front of your waist, back of your diaphragm belt, front of your diaphragm belt, back of your chest, front of your chest. For those of you who have been with me before, do a very rapid scan of the various parts of the left shoulder. For those of you who are new, just bring your mind to the left shoulder, left bicep, elbow, forearm, wrist, palm and back of hand, thumb, pointer, middle, ring, pinky. Same thing, quick scan of the right shoulder, bicep, elbow, forearm, wrist, palm and back of hand, thumb, pointer, middle, ring, pinky. All 3 parts of your neck, the joint between the neck and the head, and the skull. Bring the mind to the top of the head now. Pull the attention down from the top of the head to both hands. Be aware of 3 points, the top of the head and both hands. Pull the awareness down from the top of the head to both feet. Be aware of 5 points, head, hands, feet. Hold your attention on 5 points. Okay. Don't take out your legs. Keep your legs with the sensations that have been built up from standing, and begin the walking meditation. If you need to walk at an extraordinarily slow pace, that's totally normal. Maintain the awareness of the 5 points, even if you need to move as slow as I'm moving on the screen right now. The key point is to only move at the pace that you can actually maintain the object of meditation. If you find that you've lost the object, then stand still for a moment. Reestablish the connection, top of the head, hands, feet, and then begin walking again. And only go as fast as you can actually maintain the 5 points. Find a seated position. Question coming in. How do you know if you're maintaining the 5 points or just jumping between them? Practice. There's no trick to that part, unfortunately. Questions? Yes, the objective is to be aware of all five as one object. Being aware of the 5 points is a bridging exercise between body scanning, in which you're becoming aware of one part of the body at a time, and becoming aware of the entire body as one object. So look at my screen, for example, and look at me in the middle of the screen. Body scanning is a bit like that, where in the, let's call it the image of the tactile body, you're becoming aware of, if I can do this, you're becoming aware of one part, right? This part. Now, with your mind, even though it seems like it's two different objects, become aware of what's on the left and right side of me at the same time. And notice how, if you keep your attention sort of pointed at me, with your peripheral vision, you can look at these two parts, right? So one, as part of one focal object, oh, finally the AI has woken up, much to my dismay. Part of one focal object, you can focus on two different things at the same time. It depends on how your mind is engaging with your experience. Yeah. And what we're building up to with the 5 points is eventually being able to meditate on the 6 directions, which is a way of taking your awareness and spreading it out into the tactile body, for example. You're going to do this with all 5 of your senses. But at first, you do it with the tactile body. And then letting go of the 6 directions at some point and just being aware of tactile, the whole tactile sphere without relying upon points or directions. So by way of analogy, 5 points is sort of like being aware of this part of the screen, this part of the screen, and this part of the screen all at once. So you've taken in this as the object versus, so, sorry, hold on. As I've said before, sometimes technology gets smarter, and as it does, it gets stupider, which is really weird. Like you just want it to do the thing you asked it to do and not anticipate 7 things you didn't ask it to do. Um, so 5 points would be like being aware of up here, and right here. But the goal is to eventually be able to see the whole visual field, right? So then 6 directions is being aware of this part, this part, this part, and this part of the screen. And then to abide on the screen, you need to become aware of the whole screen. Well, what's interesting is if you, even right now, if you pull your awareness back and just become aware of the whole screen, it doesn't matter what I do on the screen, your awareness stays the same, relatively speaking, because you're aware of the entire field, and the entire field, more or less, is not changing, you see? So likewise, when you train in the tactile body, first you go through and you just look at each little piece, so you get better at seeing each little piece, right? And then you're trying to spread the awareness out, so you become aware of 5 points that are at big extremes from each other inside the object. And then to spread it out even further, you become aware of forward, back, up, down, left, right. Again, spreading the awareness into the field. And then eventually you just become aware of the entire screen, so to speak, to the entire extent of that field. And you hold that as the object, which is actually getting you much closer to being aware of, finally, one of your fundamental consciousnesses, right? Being aware of what tactile awareness is. When you're not holding it on objects in the field, you're holding it on the field itself, right? And then you do it in the way that I have set up the technique. Then you would do it with vision, then you do it with sound, then you do it with smell, then you do it with taste. And there are reasons I put them in that order, but those aren't so important for today. So what does the progression with mental sense look like? The progression with mental sense is that you become aware of mental content. And at first there's this struggle between, because the mental content kind of does this with your mind, and it pulls your mind around. And then, so you're learning at first to just pull your mind back while this content goes on, and then it sort of closes in and is pulling you around again, and then you're pulling back. And then at some point the mind can just sort of sit back and watch mental content without getting involved. And also, your mind, if this is your central mind, has these 5 senses. And the central mind the 5 senses are trying to pull your awareness out. But because you've already tamed, to a large degree, your 5 external senses, so that the mind is getting pulled out only to a minimum degree by each one of the 5 senses, now you can take the attention and pull it inwards towards the central mind without them pulling out, right? So now here we are with most of the attention in the central mind, in mental consciousness, and we're observing mental content for the first time. Now, some techniques, some teachers, some schools, they say, just sit down and observe your mind and do the meditation of non-meditation. Frankly, I have no idea how in the hell a person would do that, because if you sit down to try to do that, your mind immediately goes like this, is being pulled out by all the 5 senses, and it's getting involved with mental content. So this is what's happening the whole time. And you think, because you didn't do any of that on purpose, that you're just sitting. But you haven't even done 1 second of just sitting, because the central mind is being pulled out all over the place to objects and you aren't able to stop it. And central mind and all the contents of this mind, you're not able to sit there and just watch them. You're going like this the whole time and getting pulled around. With this method, you tame the 5 external senses so the mind can turn towards its content. Once it turns towards its content, it gets pulled around for a bit, and then it can sit there without getting pulled around for the most part and watch content. And then this starts to happen, where you get gaps, and the mental content stops for periods of time. And then at some point, you start to become aware of what this thing that is generating the content and being aware of the content, you start to become aware of what this thing is like, because there's nothing in front of it for it to know something about. And since it's a thing that knows things, this is what it does for a living, it starts to become aware of itself. It's probably already aware of itself right now, but that awareness of itself is buried pretty deep in our experiential layers. It's sort of like the nose on your face. If you turn your attention to your nose right now, most of you can actually see your nose, but unless you turn your attention there, you don't notice. Even more difficult, some of you can probably see your eye socket here and your eyebrow, but you don't notice. You can probably see in some cases your eyelashes, but you don't notice. So likewise, when you've turned the mind inwards and content begins to stop for a while, then this mind's awareness of its own nature becomes stronger and stronger until you have a very good sense experientially of what consciousness is. One of the new students who has a bit of a background in Theravada practice, so already has some experience, started doing that practice, and within a couple of days came to me and was asking questions and was saying, okay, I get it they said something like this, I get it when I'm looking at visual consciousness, I can sort of place, for lack of a better term, place myself somewhere, and I'm kind of looking from over here, and I see the whole visual field, right? And he goes, I get that. And you can do that with the other senses, and you kind of get it, because there's a place to be as the knower, as the mind that's knowing, even though you end up in a non-dual condition. At least you kind of start where you're going, okay, I'm kind of over here, and there's the image that's appearing here, and at some point they come together and become non-dual in my experience, but you have something to sort of grab onto. The thing with consciousness that makes it so much more difficult is consciousness itself, in terms of your direct experiential appearance of what consciousness is like, it's not occurring in any particular location. It's not like rooted here or here. It's not just like in one particular location in your body or one particular location in space. It doesn't have a location in space when you look at it. And when it moves, it doesn't feel like anything. When it generates that, like right now, visualize the Buddha as best you can. Did it feel like anything for the mind to generate the image of the Buddha? Or did the image just sort of appear there and then you have feelings maybe about the Buddha, right? The mind's ability to move and do things and generate stuff and change doesn't have, unless it becomes really coarse and sort of gross and obvious, doesn't have like a feeling of moving around. So it simply has to become aware of these things that are appearing that the thing itself is generating and getting involved with and moving around, with no reference point for you to grab on and go, okay, now I'm existing over here as the mind in this place and everything else is occurring around it. It's not like that. So when you start experiencing what consciousness is like, you'll find that it's way harder than the other five senses, because there's nothing for you to grab onto and go, okay, now I'm just sitting as consciousness and stuff is occurring in consciousness. Because, for example, look around my room. You know what you don't see? The air, right? You don't see the air. And you certainly don't see the space that the air is sitting in. And consciousness, according to the great texts, is like space. So even subtler than the air, which you can feel moving around, which is maybe like the winds associated with consciousness, even subtler than that is the consciousness itself, which is the space in which the room and the air is sitting, right? And it's sort of like consciousness. We're sitting on a planet right now, hurtling through space at whatever, some ungodly speed, I can't remember what it is, like 1,000 miles an hour or something. But it seems like we're just sitting still over here. Because space, how to say, I don't know, I can't really push that analogy too far, but consciousness is like empty space. And so when you go, okay, I'm going to grab onto consciousness now, you just end up grabbing nothing. Consciousness isn't nothing, but it's like empty space that knows things and can give rise to experiences. And so once mental content starts to drip off, right, sort of die down and dissolve back into consciousness, then you start to become aware of what consciousness is like more and more. And then, at least in my way of doing this, at that point, if you're able to generate that experience, let's say for like an hour or two a day, at that point I would say, okay, now for sure go talk to like your lineage lamas and your your Theravadan teachers, because there will be steps in your lineage once you have the capability to look at consciousness at that level of detail and that level of stability and blah blah blah. And you'd probably be better served by taking the next steps in your lineage than taking them with me. But if you were going to carry on with me and do a little bit more than that, then Foundation 5, rumination meditation, you would then analyze the nature of that consciousness and see, how does it exist? Yes, it appears as a knowingness that is like space that gives rise to things. That's its conventional qualities. But how does it exist fundamentally? And so then we're talking about trying to observe, directly observe, or at least infer conceptually the selflessness of consciousness or the emptiness of inherent existence of consciousness. And that's something that if you can access the conventional, the fundamental properties or the conventional nature of vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and mental consciousness, well, now you have direct experience of all 6 major things making you up as a being, which means that you can actually do a really serious analysis of how it is you exist for the first time. Up to that point, a huge amount of what you're relying upon as evidence, for example, we were talking about prasangika, emptiness, middle way school, the consequentialists, the autonomists, blah, blah, blah. A huge amount of what you're relying upon to understand and get into detail with and argue about and work through those positions is just words and definitions and making those fit together. But once you can directly look at the actual things that make you up as a being, you can look for yourself. When you look at the cup in a state of deep concentration, does it have specific characteristics or does it not? If you can see what actually appears to the pramana of vision, to the valid knower of non-conceptual cognition of the cup in visual consciousness, then you can actually investigate. Is it a roundness? Is there a roundness there? Is there a cylindricalness there? Is there an orangeness there? Or not? And then likewise, when you look at consciousness and the other 5 senses and the body and blah, 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 however you want to do the analysis, you can look and say, well, is there a set of specific characteristics there upon which I'm imputing Jared? Or is there not? In addition to that, when I look for this Jared person who's meditating, or if I look maybe a little subtler, if I look for the consciousness that is doing the meditating, do I find that consciousness existing in the way it appears, or do I not? So now you can understand from direct experience, you're not yet talking about a direct insight into emptiness or selflessness, but the evidence now that you're using to prove or to show or to become convinced that emptiness and selflessness are correct is now experiential, which means that your understanding of those subjects is going to be light years ahead, because you're not relying upon a bunch of words and logic and reasoning not connected directly to experience to prove that this is correct. Instead, you have all the logic and reasonings and observations in addition to the reasons you're using to support those being experiential to prove the selflessness and emptiness. That's much more powerful. So this then connects to all of your critical studies in terms of, if you were in the Gelug, for example, your studies of emptiness and illuminating the intent and all these exciting, sexy things we were talking about earlier. Okay. More questions in the chat. Let's see. So, yes, one of the problems with in the beginning trying to meditate on consciousness itself is that you don't know what you're doing. And as you turn the mind inwards towards calmness, just like any other object where the mind is turning inwards and the mind is more calm, you have a tendency to fall asleep, to blank out, to not be aware of anything in particular. And that will actually make you dumber, is what the texts say. It'll make you stupider. So you want to try to avoid that if you can. And so you need more practice probably with the external senses to make the mind highly lucid, highly alert, while also being calm. If you do more body scanning with a more refined sort of like a scalpel instead of a butcher knife, then the mind will be more calm but also more lucid because you're going through a process of analysis. By the way, for those who are interested, this is part of the reason I put the practices in this order. Because after the mind gets stable, the next problem is it doesn't stay lucid. It doesn't stay highly cognitively alert. That's the problem you have once you get past the problem of being distracted. You see? This is also why I'm transitioning over to Mahamudra practice, because if you can make the five external senses highly awake, highly lucid, aware of their objects, and you practice that, then when you look at consciousness, you'll have more experience making the mind highly lucid, awake, aware, while being stable, before you're trying to look at consciousness, which is a really difficult object to look at. It's just, frankly, incredibly difficult to just look at consciousness without the mind getting involved in stuff or trying to do stuff. Okay. Abhishek asks, Abhishek asks if you can achieve the results of Buddhism just by using science or by focusing on scientific stuff. At this time, I don't think so. If you look at the cognitive scientific research into meditation and modern mindfulness and secular mindfulness techniques, I've said this before, but there's a normal human bell curve for things like emotional regulation, attention, this sort of thing. And as far as I've seen, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I've seen in my research for my master's degree, for example, where you find really good secular mindfulness people is sort of at the far end of the normal bell curve for these things in human beings. In other words, you really can get better at emotional regulation, attention regulation, some of the markers for whatever it is, depression, anxiety, these things, by training in mindfulness. However, if this is the normal bell curve for like having a good, let's say, concentrated mind, let's put this as sort of the cluster for really good modern mindfulness and secular people in meditation. Slide the graph over like this. So now this is the end, right? The bell curve comes like this, and these are where the sort of best secular meditators and stuff are. When they've studied Tibetan yogis who have trained hardcore in the actual religious practices and so forth, you slide all the way over here and they form their own bell curve over here out in outer space somewhere. What they can do with their minds is so far beyond what other classes of meditators who don't have the full systems for these things is. They're not even comparable, really. They're two completely different things. They're on the same continuum, but this one's like the yogis are like way over here, and the secular meditators are way over here, is the best that I've seen. So simply focusing on, for example, a scientific secular approach and, you know, blah, blah, blah. At this time, even from a cognitive scientific perspective, from what I've seen, doesn't produce the same results. So I would have to say, no, you can't achieve these results without actually training in a proper lineage from a religious perspective. Does that mean that's where you're going to start? No, you start wherever you are. You start where you are. You don't start at the far end of the at the far end of the bell curve. Okay. Let's see. Someone says something about metta. Metta to everyone. Metta to you. We cannot understand nirvana moksha without being related to samsara. What, my camera's too dark? Let me see if I can fix that. Give me a moment. This may make it better or may make it worse. Oh, better. Okay. So, yeah, also thinking about what nirvana means, right? Thinking about what nirvana is and what it means. Nirvana means escaping from an infinite cycle of rebirth, karma. So, almost by definition, a secular scientific approach to this can't do that, right? Because we're already talking about overcoming rebirth. And no, it was my camera. Yeah, yeah. Already, just by talking about this thing called moksha or nirvana, we're talking about escaping from something that more or less falls on the religious spectrum of ideas. So, secular mindfulness, secular meditation, it's not bad. Again, the data on this is very clear. It takes you somewhere, and that somewhere is probably better than what other people who aren't doing those practices in general have in terms of mental well-being, if you do it in a serious way. But there's a world of difference between those results from what I've seen and what the great meditators and yogis who are doing this in a religious context are accomplishing. Well, Solid says that the secular people are sort of looking at the menu and the practitioners are eating the food. I don't think so. I think the secular practitioners are at least having like soup and appetizers, you know? But there's like a giant Sunday roast with all the fixins and potatoes and roasted carrots and really expensive beverages and to continue the analogy. And then there's cheese and nuts and dessert and coffee, little Italian espressos. So there's like a whole meal that they're missing out on. But they're definitely, again, to carry on with the analogy, because the yogis are like way over here on the bell curve. And the secular meditators are sort of here on the bell. The bell curve is sort of ends here, and the yogis are way over here somewhere. So there's a whole meal that other people aren't getting to enjoy. But thank you, General. They're definitely on the way to something if they were to carry on, but it doesn't lead as far. Yeah, probably no secular rainbow body. I don't know. You have to ask Sam Harris. You have to ask Sam Harris. I'm not sure. So Abhishek is asking about rebirth and so forth. Usually I try to stick to your actual practice. If you're coming to this session, I try to answer questions about the actual practices people are doing. So if you're doing rebirth related practices, congratulations. If you're not doing those practices yet, then try to stick with the things you're actually doing in your daily sessions of training. That being said, no, it's not just based on faith. There are philosophical arguments and experiments that you can do right now to come to the conclusion that your mind is probably non-physical. Modern physics also has avenues for understanding that consciousness is probably something, as they would say in physics, non-local. In other words, something that isn't simply stuck in your head, and that consciousness is one of the ingredients required for potential things, potential particles in potential states to become actual particles in actual states. And if that's the case, then your brain can't be the thing producing consciousness. Otherwise, you would have a chicken and egg problem. The consciousness has to come first, then the particles, then the brain. So there are avenues in modern physics, for example, the special status of consciousness interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is a non-quack, non-BS, legitimate position held by some Nobel Prize-winning physicists, is an option to help you understand why and how it is that consciousness should be, let's say, a non-physical thing. Furthermore, if you look at the University of Virginia's website, they have a whole bunch of research on children with past life memories. That research study, conducted by psychologists, has been going on since the 1960s, and their research methods have gotten better and better and better. And they're still finding children who have rebirth memories, and they're finding them at an early enough stage and with enough specific information about the people that they were in the past to track down those previous rebirth situations and to verify details about their lives that are not on the public record, not on the internet, not anywhere except in hard copy stuff amongst those people's personal effects or with family members who are still alive and so on. So we have that on the one hand. Also, through the University of Virginia also and a number of other places, there have been, in the Netherlands, I believe, for example, major studies done now on near-death experience. And those studies in the past were not so good, but they've now done two really large, very well-designed studies on near-death experience and shown, for example, with a really good near-death near-death experience study, what you would want to see, for example, is that you can prove the person was actually clinically dead at the time they had the experience, right? That would be good. And that they brought back specific verifiable pieces of information. And that also what would be nice is, since they're under sedation, that there would be a chemical reason they couldn't form a memory during that time. And since like for example, during a heart transplant, there's a period of time where your brain doesn't get oxygen. So there's a biological reason that you shouldn't be able to form a new memory during that time. And furthermore, because your eyes are covered, for example, there's a physical reason why you shouldn't be able to form a memory related to vision, as an example. And nonetheless, when you control for all of these factors and take people in a condition like people who have heart transplants, for example, during the time that their heart is out of their body and there's no blood flowing to the brain for short periods of time, while they're getting set up and having the blood put through an artificial heart and all this, quite a few people, something like 25%, between 12 and 25%, have near-death experiences. And some percentage of those people have what they call kind of a full-on near-death experience, of not just a couple of the stages, but leaving the body, getting specific information, et cetera, et cetera. So when you look at the research studies that have been done in design now, they have really, really good data showing that near-death experiences are real things. So on the front end, we have children with past life memories, and the research there has gotten quite good. And on the back end, we have near-death experiences where people's experiencing part of themselves, their consciousness, leaves the body and goes and does other things when the body is clinically dead. So we have the beginning, where minds are coming in. We have the middle, where you can use philosophical arguments and a bit of physics to say probably mind is non-physical. And then at the end, we have near-death experience, where it seems like consciousness continues on. And then if you're Buddhist or Taoist, we have one more piece of evidence, if it helps, which is that we have great meditators and yogis who say, like I said in the podcast, which will go up again, if you spend time in these communities where people are training hardcore in concentration, it's just a normal thing that people who have been in retreat 6 months or a year or 2 years remember past lives. So This isn't some historical thing where, well, yeah, in the past everybody was remembering past lives, but since we invented the light bulb and the computer, everyone stopped. No, people today go into retreat and recall past lives. Sometimes it's lay people. Sometimes it's people that are just doing relatively short retreats, like a month or whatever. But there are still meditators today at the great monasteries, both in Thailand, both in the Theravada tradition and Mahayana tradition, who recall past lives. So we have the great yogis saying, if you train in concentration, you will be able to see the mind is non-physical for yourself, and you'll be able to see that this is not your first life and that you have past lives. You can see the continuum. So, on the whole, near-death experience, philosophy and a bit of physics, childhood past life memories, and then overarching the three, if you're Buddhist or Taoist, or probably also Hindu, maybe also Jain, maybe also Sikh, there are probably people in your extended community, if you seek them out, who will tell you, yes, if you train in concentration, you can see that your consciousness is not necessarily always inhabiting a physical form and that it passes from lifetime to lifetime. So we can create a pretty good argument before having those experiences ourselves that the mind is non-physical, that death is not the end, and that rebirth is a very likely possibility, to give you a thorough answer to the question. Okay, let's see. Why do people get born in different circumstances? So I've done my best to try to answer this rebirth question in a class that's not about theoretical questions. And I've also been as polite as I can in saying that this is not the appropriate time or place to ask theoretical questions. This time is reserved for people who are doing practice and training, and they're here to get practice and training questions answered related to their meditation practice. When I do an open Q&A, you can come and ask whatever you want. But if you don't have meditation related questions for your personal practice today, this week, then just wait for an open Q&A. Okay. Um, do we have any more meditation questions before we call it a day? All right, my friends. Well, keep an eye out. The podcast with Neil Ripsky is going to drop again soon in the next few days, and very likely also the Lohan course is going to drop with the new website that I have been working very, very, very hard to help Neil put together, um, so that you guys can train in a physical and energetic system designed mostly by Buddhists with a little bit of help from the Taoists to make your body absolutely perfect for meditation training and to make your subtle body, your energy system, absolutely perfect for meditation training. And since these are two things I don't teach explicitly, I'm very, very pleased to have found someone who knows that stuff really well to help you with that aspect if you're interested. Okay, do I have a technique to relax the frontalis? I'm not sure which muscle the frontalis is. But in general, if you're struggling with certain muscles and so forth getting tired, some of that is just about, oh, your forehead. Are you scrunching like this? Or are you pulling it back like this? Those are both pretty common. Sort of the focus face or the sort of being blown out of your seat face, like, whoa. So both of those are pretty common. No specific exercise, just as you do body scanning and you become aware of your face, for example, you'll start to release those muscles because you know it's involuntary. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very common when you're focused on one thing. You go purse the lips, scrunch the eyebrows, right? But as you sit more and more and more, and you become more aware of your face, just extra stuff that doesn't need to be going on to actually help you keep on yourself on the object, it stops happening. It happens less and less, and then it stops happening. All right, I believe that is it for the day. Um, okay, thank you so much for coming. Keep an eye out for when that podcast redrops. I'll notify you in the community section. And I'm also pleased to announce the next guest will very likely be the Advaita Vedanta practitioner that I mentioned. I turned over the questions to Dr. Abhishek, another Abhishek. Abhishek is a very common name in India, apparently. I know three Abhisheks now. The Abhishek is here tonight, Dr. Abhishek, and one of my students in India named Abhishek. So, um, So I've turned over the questions, both my questions and the questions that were in the community section, to him, and we will be hopefully in the next week or so doing another Two Truths podcast. And I know quite a few people are interested to hear people that kind of know their traditions, let's say, on the Advaita side and the Buddhist side having a conversation. So I'm really excited about it too. I've never gotten to talk to an Advaita practitioner who's quite competent. And so this will be interesting and rewarding for me as well. So we'll probably, just like the last podcast, it'll go up live, so you'll have a chance to ask questions. He and I will talk for about an hour and cover some of the ground that I want to cover. Then we'll open it up to questions until we both get tired or until he runs out of time. And yeah, and then for those who attend live, you'll get to see the whole thing through, and then I'll take it down, edit it as I did with the previous one, and put it back up in an edited form when it's done. So stay tuned. Set your notifications on when I go live. The only time to see the full thing unedited, etc., will be when it's actually happening. And I know for some of you it'll be out of your time zone, so I apologize, but you will get to see the edited version if you don't catch it live. All right. All right, my friends. I will talk to you all again very soon, I hope. As I like to say, hope to see you again soon. Try not to die before I do.